Very good morning, 11 o'clock congregation. How are we today? Wow, better than normal. Delighted to hear so. We are now on week 6 of our series looking at the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And after the introductory talk, so far we have looked at love, patience, gentleness, and kindness. So you should all be behaving like cuddly teddy bears right now. Today, we are looking at self-control. Now, whenever I think of self-control, at least, where my mind goes is surely what it's all about is keeping our passions and our desires in check. There are things out there that activate our emotions. Put the next slide up, like this one here. There's things out there that kind of get us going, set our appetites loose, whether it be food, sex, money, power would be obvious ones, ambition, success, popularity, whatever it might be. And if we give ourselves to them entirely, that would be bad for us, and therefore we need to control ourselves. That's surely what self-control is all about. Well, that is definitely how ancient thinkers saw self-control, people like Plato and Aristotle. And they felt the greatest kind of human being there could be was the kind of person that could control themselves and keep their passions and their desires in check. And if you were able to do that, you were known as a conqueror, because you had even been able to master yourself. That's self-control. Well, that kind of thinking falls well short of what the Bible says about self-control. And in fact, a very, very famous passage in the Bible in Romans chapter 8 that many of you will be very familiar with indeed. When it describes Christians as being more than a conqueror, that's exactly what it's referring to. Christians are more than people that simply keep their passions and their desires in check. There is more to self-control than that. When the Bible looks at self-control, the Bible looks at our deeper inner motivations. The Bible would ask ourselves the question, why do you want to be self-controlled? Who do you want to be self-controlled for? What's your goal in being self-controlled? You see, it is entirely possible to have outstandingly high levels of self-control and yet not be living the fullest kind of life that you otherwise might be. Let me illustrate. I was reading Psychology Today magazine very recently and read a very, very sad article entitled The Skinny Sweepstakes. And the article featured a number of young girls who, when it came to their diets, had outstandingly high levels of self-control. They would ruthlessly control every single calorie, know what to cut out of their diet, what to include. And yet, if anything, it made their lives worse, not better. Why? It was because of their motivation, because of their goal, which was for image, it was for beauty, it was for favorable comparisons with other women. One of the girls in the article said this: dieting made me feel I was in control of something. It was one thing I knew I could change on my own. I would diet and get positive feedback and feel really good, so I wouldn't eat for a few days at a time. I ended up constantly comparing myself to other people. I was in a restaurant with my boyfriend, and a girl walked in who was really pretty and much thinner than me. I saw him glance at her. I went into the bathroom and cried. There is a young girl who has outstandingly high levels of self-control, and yet, if anything, it's led her into an altogether different kind of slavery. Doesn't have to do with image either. Maybe you've met people who are incredibly controlled when it comes to their use of time. They plan each and every final minute, hate being late for anything. And yet, whenever I meet those people, they don't half make me feel like they care more about getting to the next appointment than being with me in the here and now. In some ways, it feels like they are a slave to getting things done, accomplishment, success. Then there are people who are incredibly controlled when it comes to their money. Very impressive management of what comes in and what goes out. In my experience, those people are not the most generous and the most joyous that I have ever met. There are other people that are incredibly self-controlled when it comes to their behavior. They care very much what other people think of them. Social etiquette, manners matter a lot. They really care how they come across. Often those people seem to be slaves to other people's approval. And they can be extraordinarily unforgiving when people around them don't behave as they should. You see, when it comes to self-control, the key question is, what is our great motivation? What are we really living for? Guy we've quoted before here at Christ Church is a man by the name of David Foster Wallace. quite brilliant man, world-renowned, best-selling novelist, tragically committed suicide aged 46 in 2008. He said this, I think Liam Thatcher quoted this a few months ago. Great quote, I'm going to repeat it. Here's something else that's true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship, and pretty much anything you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly, and when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Worship power, you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out, and so on and so on and so on. You see, when it comes to self-control, the key question is, what are you worshipping? Guy we quote often here at Christchurch is a man by the name of Tim Keller. Leads a church in New York. He's written a book that touches on some of this called Counterfeit Gods. In it, he writes this: what many people call psychological problems are simply issues of idolatry. Idolatry is basically worshipping the wrong thing. Perfectionism, workaholism, chronic indecisiveness, the need to control the lives of others, all these stem from making good things into idols that then drive us into the ground as we try to appease them. When it comes to self-control, if you are worshipping the wrong thing, it can be absolutely fatal for the human condition. And if anyone said to me, Andy, I get what you're saying, but I think I can be self-controlled and not become a slave to something else. I think I can be utterly self-controlled when it comes to my diet and not become a slave to image. I can control my desires for ambition for the future and not become obsessed with success. I can control my finances outstandingly well and not become a slave to getting more stuff and always checking my bank balance. I would say two things. Firstly, I wonder whether you're a little too obsessed with being in control. Whether your goal, your God, your idol is, I want to be in control. I wonder what might happen when you are out of control and when you fail. The second thing I would say is this: I don't think anyone can exercise that kind of self-control their whole lives long. Why? Because we are weak and fallible human beings. Some really interesting research on self-control out there right now. Possibly the world's leading expert is a professor by the name of Roy Baumeister, who's based in the United States. Loads of really interesting research. One interesting experiment he did with this. Took a group of people, and to half of them he said, I want you to indulge yourselves, eat chocolate cookies to your heart's content. Off they went. The other half, he said, I want you to resist these chocolate cookies, exercise self-control, and eat radishes instead, the world's most disgusting vegetable. And after he'd done that, he gave both groups an impossible geometry puzzle to solve. No way they could solve it. What he found was this: the groups that had indulged themselves in chocolate cookies gave up trying to solve the impossible puzzle after 20 minutes. The group that had exercised self-control and eaten the radishes gave up after just 8 minutes. Why? Well, what Roy Baumeister has shown is this: that actually self-control takes up energy in our bodies. Actually, the same kind of energy we use to make decisions. And we will spend 3 to 4 hours every single day exercising self-control. No, I won't have that second piece of cake, thank you very much. No, I won't say what I really think about you, I'll control my tongue, because that will help our relationship go a little bit better. No, I won't think inappropriately about that person, I will control my thoughts. 3 to 4 hours every day exercising self-control, but over the course of the day, that energy gets depleted. And what Roy Baumeister thinks happened in that experiment is the group that exercised self-control and ate the radishes had less self-control energy in the tank, and so gave into the temptation to quit quicker. That is why many people will struggle with temptation late at night, because they're more tired. They have less energy. That's why many couples will bicker late into the evening, because they have less control over their tongue, they're more fatigued. That's why if you're having an argument, it's much better to reconcile, let the other person know that you love them, and try and resolve the dispute the following morning when you've had a good night's sleep and have more energy in the tank. And therefore, for every single person, there will come a set of circumstances whereby you're not going to have much energy. Who knows what they might be? And in that moment, we will realize how weak and fragile and how prone we are to succumb to temptation that we are. And if in that moment we are worshipping the wrong thing, it is not good news for the human condition. If I'm worshipping image and beauty and how I look and my body, which, as you can see, I am, and I suddenly give in to temptation and gorge on a chocolate cake, in that moment, the brokenness that happens in here is pretty bad news for the human condition. The key question is, what are we worshipping? And the same can happen for Christians as well. We can struggle with self-control. Why? Because our focus is in the wrong place. Let me illustrate. Matt Collins, if you'd like to come up. Now, what I've got here for Matt is a double chocolate gatto. This is purchased from Waitrose. It's good stuff. You'd like to hold that, please? Just smells good. Now, this here represents whatever temptation you are prone to. I don't know what it might represent. Lust, pornography, sexual fantasy, gossip, bad temper, obsession with the future, ambition, getting stuff done. Galatians chapter 5, put the next slide up, lists a whole load right before the fruit of the Spirit. Calls them the acts of the flesh. Don't know whether anything there particularly resonates with you. Jealousy, obsession with what other people have. Lewd behavior, coarse language, drunkenness, giving into the pleasure of the moment, selfish ambition to get stuff done, finding meaning through accomplishment. And what many people think successful Christianity is I've just got to resist the cake. I've just got to make sure I come back next week, next month, next year, and the cake's intact. Then God will love me, then he'll accept me, then I've been a good Christian. Well, if that's all being a Christian is, in that metaphor, in that analogy, over time, over the months and the years, that cake goes stale. It goes hard. It goes bad. That is a metaphor for what happens to many, many people's relationships with Jesus. Why? Because it becomes far more about what we can do for Jesus rather than what he has already done for us. That is why I am such a fan of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because here's people who've given in to the temptation to drink repeatedly. It's become an addiction. How do they start their support group? Even if they've not touched the cake, even if they've not touched a drop for 10, 20, 30 years, how do they start their support group? Hi, my name's such and such, my name's Andy, and I'm an alcoholic. In other words, I need a higher power if I'm to avoid giving in to this temptation. My focus is not, yay, look at me, I've resisted. No, my focus is somewhere altogether different. That is the key. And the other danger that Christians have is if you focus too much on yourself, what happens if you give in to temptation? Matt, I'd like you to take the biggest bite of cake you possibly can. Gorge yourself. Give in. Get in. There we go. Get in. There we go. Now, calm down. Here's what's happening right now. He's enjoying in the moment the pleasures of sin. Tastes good? Tastes good. After that pleasure wears off, ultimately, he'll feel it somewhere else, like we all do. If I asked Matt how he felt then, I imagine he would say this: dirty and a little bit embarrassed. And I guarantee you right now, I promise you right now, there are people even in this room who inside feel like this: dirty and a little bit embarrassed. And you've come into church and you've sung all the songs and you've said amen in all the right places, but what you're really thinking in here is, if people knew what I'd done this week, if people knew the temptation that I'd given into, they wouldn't think so highly of me. I wonder if even God accepts me. And so many Christians I know sway between two extremes, either smug because I'm all clean, I've not touched the cake, I've not given in to temptation, or they feel utterly condemned because they have, and they feel like they've failed. There is a better walk with Jesus that is available for us than that. And if you are sitting listening to this talk right now and you feel, I'm pretty clean, I don't have a problem with a lack of self-control, you need to know you are not half as clean and pure as you think you are. And if you are listening to this talk and you feel dirty and a little bit embarrassed and ashamed and guilty right now, you need to know that Jesus sees you in an altogether different way. Therefore, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. We are more than conquerors. We are more than people who simply, I've got to resist. There is more to being a Christian than that. Can I have a massive round of applause, please, for Matt Collins? Keep the cake. He's not staying for the rest of the talk. Shame on him. Now, you see, those two extremes, those two approaches to self-control, that is exactly what the Apostle Paul found. He wrote vast swathes of the New Testament. Really interesting research on this. Tim Keller, who I mentioned earlier, has taught on this a bit. I've done my own research on this a little bit as well. It's all kind of mixed in together. If you often find a Christian community, a religious community, they will often want to be self-controlled for God. That's their great motivation. I trust that God is real. He's got the best life for me. I want to be self-controlled for him. That's right. That's as it should be. Motivation in the right place. Worshipping the right God. What often happens in subsequent generations is they look at their parents and say, well, you know, I like the self-control virtue. That's good. But I don't want God. What I really want is to be self-controlled just for me. And they become consumed. I've got to be self-controlled for me. That approach is called Stoicism, where people just want to be self-controlled because it's just about me getting ahead in life, and self-control will do me good. Many of my grandparents and great-grandparents' generation were Stoics. If you've ever watched a period drama from Victorian or Edwardian England, you can see the fruits of a Stoic lifestyle. Legalism, judgmentalism, disregard for the poor. Oh, you know, it's all their own fault. Given into temptation. Oh, they're just weak people, not like me. You see scandal and gossip. Did you hear what she did? Oh, outrageous. You find elitism, condescension, pride. That's the fruits of a Stoic lifestyle. Because it's all about self-actualization. It's all about me. That's a Stoic lifestyle. And if religious people often give birth to Stoics, Stoics will often give birth to what are called Epicureans. Epicureans follow the teaching of a guy called Epicurus. The goal is the same. I want to be happy. But whereas Stoics say, I want to be happy, so I'll be self-controlled to get ahead in life, Epicureans say, well, if there's no God and there's no truth, why do I want to be self-controlled? Let's just give myself to pleasure. Let's just become a hedonist. Many of my parents' generation were Epicureans, were hedonists. In fact, if you look at this next slide here, you can just do this in Google. It's just a graph, which will come up in a minute, of the amount of books that were written on self-control every year over the last 100 years. You can see it plummets as you approach the 1960s. Free love, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Why do I want to be self-controlled? No, just give myself to pleasure. Religious people give birth to Stoics. Stoics often give birth to Epicureans. I find it fascinating that when the Apostle Paul went to a place called Athens in Acts chapter 17, we find in verse 16 he gets distressed because the city is so full of idols. They are worshipping the wrong thing. Who does he debate with 2 verses later? Acts 17 verse 18. Stoics and Epicureans. Stoics who say, I want to be self-controlled for me. Epicureans who say, I don't want to be self-controlled for me. And incidentally, if you care about this kind of stuff and find it interesting like I do, if religious people often give birth to Stoics, Stoics often give birth to Epicureans. Who do Epicureans often give birth to? Who's my generation right now? Well, what you often find is you find a generation of people who look at their forefathers and say, that don't work. What are the fruits of free love, sex, drugs, rock and roll? What's the fruits of giving yourself to pleasure? Broken families, broken marriages, fatherlessness, an explosion of mental and anxiety-based disorders. And what you find is a generation that are desperately hungry and thirsty for meaning and purpose in life. And one of the reasons, tangentially, I think the Alpha Course has exploded into existence in the last 2 decades is not simply because it's a brilliant course full of great material that help people to explore meaning in life, but also because it has tapped into the subconscious longings of a generation that are asking the question, there's got to be more to life than this. It's very fertile right now for faith conversations. People are asking, that life don't work. And all of that is a way of saying, when it comes to self-control, whether we exercise it or not, where our focus is the key question. That's the point. That's the key. And I want to do some very brief teaching, asking the question, how can we grow in self-control? And I want to do it from Titus chapter 2. If you've got a Bible, please turn there. Just to set the context for the passage. It is written by the Apostle Paul to a guy named Titus who's stationed in Crete. Crete is actually not far from where Athens is. And very much, if you look at the context, Athenian culture has swept into the nation of Crete. We find that there's very much an Epicurean mentality. People want to give themselves to pleasure. In fact, in chapter 1 and verse 12, Paul writes this, even one of Crete's own prophets has said, Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons. Here's an early piece of art that depicts what life in Crete might have been like. People who say, I don't want to be self-controlled, I just want pleasure. But there was also very much a Stoic mentality going on. We read in chapter 1 and verse 10 that there's this circumcision group present in Crete. People who are saying, if you want to be right with God, if you want to be a good person, you've got to follow rules and regulations. That is what it's all about. And we find in chapter 1 and verse 11 that this teaching is ruining whole households. And so Paul says to Titus, would you sort all that out, please? Would you straighten out what is crooked? Would you sort that out, please? And this is what he writes in Titus chapter 2. You, Titus, must teach what is in accord with sound doctrine. Teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, and sound in faith, in love, and in endurance. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine. That literally means slaves to much wine, but to teach what is good. Then they can train the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled and pure, to be busy at home, to be kind, and to be subject to their husbands, so that no one will malign the word of God. Similarly, encourage the young men to be self-controlled. A couple of interesting things here. The only instruction to young men, be self-controlled. And interestingly, Paul asked Titus to teach the older men and women and the younger men about self-control, not the younger women. The older women are to do that. Just a bit of Tilsley speculation. I wonder if that's to protect Titus from potentially tempting situations. Just a thought. Verse 7. In everything, set the young men an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. Teach slaves to be subject to their masters in everything, to try to please them and not to talk back to them, and not to steal from them, but to show that they can be fully trusted, so that in every way they will make the teaching about God our Saviour attractive. For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age, while we wait for the blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our great God and Saviour, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all wickedness, and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. These then are the things you should teach, encourage and rebuke with all authority. Do not let anyone despise you. When I first got given this topic, it felt like a biggie. Lack of self-control seems like such an issue in our culture. And I wondered if I should come up with 10 different ways to help you grow in self-control. Flee temptation like Joseph with Potiphar's wife in Genesis. What does it really mean to resist the devil and have him flee from you, like it mentions in James? How fasting can help us. In the end, as I prayed about it, I felt I should focus on one thing. The key to growing in self-control is where our motivation is what are we worshipping? What are we filling our minds with? If I'm just to sum up the teaching from Paul to Titus, who's ministering in that Stoic Epicurean culture, it's this. Verse 1, you must teach what is in accord with sound doctrine. Verse 2, teach the older men. Verse 3, teach the older women to teach what is good. Verse 4, then they can train the younger women. Verse 6, encourage the younger men. Verse 7, set them an example and in your teaching show integrity. Verse 9, teach slaves. Verse 10, so they will make the teaching about God our Saviour attractive. Verse 12, for the grace of God teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions. Verse 15, these then are the things you should teach. See, the way to grow in self-control is all down to teaching. What you fill your mind with. The God that you are worshipping. You see, at the heart of all temptation is a lie. That's what's modeled for us in Genesis 3, when Satan tempts Adam and Eve. Eat the fruit. You'll be like God. You can decide what is good and evil. Well, that was partly true, but he covered up all the brokenness and pain that would involve. And therefore, the way that you respond to deception, the way that you respond to a lie is with the truth. It's with the right answer. Jesus in the wilderness is a great example of this. Tempted by the devil in 3 different ways. Doesn't respond by jumping up and down and shouting at the devil. Doesn't do lots of amazing miracles. No, he responds by saying, Satan, that's a lie. Here's the truth. It is written. I want to illustrate this by playing a little game with you. We're going to play a game. I'm going to show you a 20-second video. And the video is of a group of basketball players who are throwing a basketball around to one another. The question I want you to answer is this. How many times do the players in white t-shirts pass the basketball to one another? I want the total of passes from the players in white t-shirts. The first person with their hand up with the right answer will win a special Andy prize. Ooh. And just a word of warning, I tried this on my wife, Joy, and a friend of mine in Christchurch, in this very room when it was empty. Both got the answer completely wrong. You need to concentrate hard. Let's show the video now. Okay, hands up if you think you know the right answer. Hannah Elwin was the first hand. What's the answer? 13, wrong. 14, wrong. Joseph? 15, Sharon Mukungu, congratulations. Your prize, it's some Christian worship CDs. I didn't really want any more. There we go. Now, here's 1990s worship coming to a home near you. Now, here's the second question. Hands up if you spotted the gorilla in the clip. Okay, probably less than half the room. If you're sitting with someone with their hand down, never go on safari with them ever. Let's just play the clip back. It's a very famous psychological experiment. While you were focusing on one thing, you missed a giant-sized gorilla in the middle of the screen. Now, the point is this. When you focus your attention in one place, you can miss gorilla-sized temptations in front of you. See what I did there? That's clever. That's the point. You fill your mind with the right thing, you will grow in self-control. Really interesting experiment at the University of California in Los Angeles, known as UCLA. Took a group of people, and to half of them they said, I want you to memorize 10 book titles that you learnt in senior school. Works of Shakespeare, things like that. To the other half, they said, I want you to memorize the 10 commandments. And at the end, there was a quiz with an incentive. The interesting result was this. The group who were memorizing the 10 books from senior school engaged and indulged in widespread cheating. I don't know, checking answers on the mobile phone, taking answers in with them, copying other people's answers, mouthing it to other people, lots of cheating, giving in to temptation. The group that memorized the 10 commandments did not cheat at all. Extraordinary result. That is in spite of not being able to remember the 10 commandments. Even then, they did not cheat. Why? Here's what I think. I think there is something about filling your mind with this book that reminds you that you were made for something better. that there is more to life than simply cheating and getting ahead yourself. There is a better kind of life available for you than that. Psalm 19 verse 7 says very simply, the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. You're struggling with a lack of self-control, giving in to temptation, fill your mind with truth. Find it interesting that it's both the older men and women as well as the younger men and women that Paul writes about self-control. Growing in self-control is not necessarily a quality that you can grow in with age. We are all prone to give in to temptation. You know, I mock my wife Joy regularly for the ridiculous amount of time it takes her to get ready whenever we're going out on a date. She suffers from a condition that I describe as wardrobe vision. Happens every time we're going out on a date. This is her routine. She goes into the shower, she comes out of the shower. She wraps a towel around her, she wanders into our bedroom, stands in front of the mirror, does her hair, does her makeup. And then every time she wanders over to our wardrobe and goes blind for an hour and a half. I'm telling you, Andy, I've got nothing to wear in here. Every now and then she'll come out with a dress. Do you think this one's okay? That's lovely, darling. You should wear that. Oh, you're just saying that, moron. There's nothing to wear in here. Yes, I'm just saying that. Just want to get to the restaurant before the third change of management that evening. It is amazing. It is amazing. The moment she actually has found a dress, wanders downstairs looking lovely, how quickly her vision comes back. Takes one look at me. You're not going out like that, are you? No, these are my practice clothes. Went out of fashion while I was waiting for you to get ready. Now, here's the point. Here's the cheesy Christian link. I meet Christians with wardrobe vision. I meet Christians with a wardrobe full of stories of God's goodness and faithfulness in their lives, and they miss it completely. God done anything for me? And rather than getting up on a Sunday morning thinking, yes, I get to give this day to God and remind myself how good he has been for me. Instead, if they can be bothered, they look online, who's preaching today? Liam Thatcher? Give that a miss. I find too many Christians with wardrobe vision. Study recently on single-engine aeroplane crashes in the US. There's a flurry of them recently. They found that 75% were caused by experienced pilots. Pilots with over 400 hours of flying experience. They thought that's a strange result. They looked into it. They found that new pilots were so excited by this new skill they'd learned, they rigorously checked everything on the plane, wanting to get it right. Older, more experienced pilots got casual, got complacent, got lazy. I know what I'm doing. And they were the cause of crashes. I have been in this church for almost a decade. I have seen the Christian equivalent of that too many times, and I want to warn you against it. Christians who think, I've read that bit of the Bible, don't need to look at it again. I didn't go, I went a week without praying, nothing happened, sun still rose and set, I don't need to do it so much. I'll go to church 1 in 4 rather than 1 in 3. And that complacency ends up leading to a crash. You a Christian of 2, 3, 4, 5 years plus, you struggling with wardrobe vision? The Apostle Peter warns us about this. 2 Peter chapter 1, he lists a whole load of qualities that we should be growing in as Christians. Interestingly, he says, add self-control to knowledge. Self-control springs from what's going on up here. Good teaching, right focus, worshipping the right God. And then he says this, if you are not growing in self-control and all those other qualities, you are what? Near-sighted and blind. And you have forgotten that you have been cleansed from your past sins. You have wardrobe vision. Do you know how good God has been to you? Do you remind yourself about the magnitude of what Jesus accomplished for you on the cross? American Bible teacher John Piper says this, the way to fight lust, any other sin, is by feeding faith with the knowledge of an irresistibly glorious God. When you make peace with God, you make war on sin. You defeat sin with superior pleasure. Want to resist temptation more? Find a superior pleasure. Story I've told before, but it's a good one, so it's worth repeating. Pastor called David Hegg. And a young guy comes to him and says, Pastor, I've got a problem with a lack of self-control. I keep sleeping with all these women. Meet them in bars or clubs, get talking, one thing leads to another, take them home, we end up having sex. I need to stop. I know it's not the best thing for me, but this irresistible force of lust comes over me. I can't control it. David Hegg thinks for a moment and says this. So I want you to imagine this scenario. You're in your bedroom late one night with a girl. One thing is leading to another. Knock on the door. I come in and I say this. If you don't have sex with that girl, I'll give you £1 million. What would you do? Guy thinks for a minute and says, I'd take the £1 million. To which David Hegg responds by saying this. Well, whatever happened to that uncontrollable force of lust that you couldn't resist? What happened to that passion that was burning so strong that you just had to give in? What happened was you found a superior pleasure. You want to grow in self-control? Find a superior pleasure. The truth is, actually, just the act of me walking in a room with you and somebody else doing something you shouldn't late at night would probably be enough to stop you. Why? Because you don't want anyone to think bad of you. If I walked in, you'd be like, no, Andy, we're not doing anything. Just doing a Bible study in our underwear. That's all we're doing. There is a greater pleasure, even still, than what I think of you. And his name is Jesus. You want to grow in self-control? What about all this resisting? Focus isn't on what you do or don't do at all. It's on a superior pleasure, an irresistibly glorious God. You filling your mind with him. That's the key. Add self-control to knowledge. Worship the right God. Focus on the right thing. Remember the guys in white t-shirts. You'll miss the gorilla along the way. That's the key. The whole point of this series is it's the fruit of the Spirit. The Spirit produces the fruit, not us. We just have to stay close to him. Are you doing that? Pray, read the Bible, worship Jesus, spend time with him. Remind yourself again what he's done for you. That's the key. I want to finish with this. It's actually a request. You see, Paul didn't ask Titus simply to teach. He asked Titus to find other men and women who would also teach and shape the lives of those around them. And I am under no illusions of the effectiveness of this sermon to change your lives and the limitations of its ability to do that. Maybe it might inspire you for a few days. I believe the Bible's powerful more than my words, so it might just do that. But we all suffer from wardrobe vision. I know I do. And what this church desperately, desperately needs is not another Andy Tilsley sermon. What this church needs is men and women who will step up and take responsibility, not just to fill their own minds with an irresistibly glorious God, but to help others do the same as well. Leadership isn't simply about a title. Leadership is influence over others. Whether you have a responsibility in this church or not, I want to ask you, would you help us? Would you take responsibility for those who are around you? Would you exercise influence? Would you help shape the thinking of those who are on the fringes, those whose heads are bowed down right now, those who are feeling insecure, those who have found their capacity weakened and they're more susceptible to temptation? Will you help us do that? That's the key. If you've got responsibility, life group leaders, connect group leaders, I urge you, don't settle for same old, same old. Don't think, we're meeting this Wednesday, let's do the same as we did last week. Think, how can I help these people? Focus on an irresistibly glorious God. Maybe an evening of prayer and worship that you lead this week is the order of the day. Oh, that's scary. Be men and women of courage, I urge you. Maybe there are people around you need to have some honest conversations with. Titus is asked to encourage and rebuke. Heard of a girl recently in this church who decided, I'm going to stop going to church altogether. I really felt a need to get in touch. I said, are you okay? She said, don't worry, Andy, I've got friends who are around me. I thought to myself, are those friends telling you what you want to hear or what you need to hear? Are you prepared to say to someone, that behavior, that's not in your best interests? With gentleness and kindness, of course. Will you put your friendship on the line to help people focus on the right God rather than Jesus and something else, to worship the right thing? That's the key. Would you lead with us? Would you be like those men and women in Crete who Titus eventually left behind and the church continued without him, took responsibility for those around them? Would you do that? Maybe the band want to come up. Why don't you all stand?